I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we go behind the headlines to cover news and information the old legacy media really does not want you to know about. We try to recover some lost history and explain the inexplicable. Today, we have somebody to help us out do both of those things, and that's Steve Baker. Steve is a reporter with The Blaze. Welcome to On Watch, Steve.
Thanks, Chris, for having me.
We really appreciate you joining us. I think we're going to have some fun talking about all kinds of topics that Washington, D.C. and officialdom really do not want to have discussed. Let's kick off with your reporting and your ideas. You get to both report and editorialize here. What your reporting has been on this revelation that, surprise, surprise, lo and behold, there was 270 some odd FBI agents wandering around Capitol Hill on January 6th. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there's no surprise that FBI is not embedded in a large crowd in D.C. for any reason. I mean, that's let's start with the non-nefarious and non-conspiratorial concepts. I mean, we want those guys doing counter surveillance. We want them looking for bad guys in the crowd, looking for bombs, threats of all types. The interesting thing that we know about January 6th, though, according to the guy who was the assistant director in charge of the Washington field office on January 6th, that would be Stephen D'Antuono, is that they did not deploy their counter surveillance teams on that day, considering the size of the crowds that were coming to D.C. And look, even though the media reported that there were only 30,000 people there, and even though the permits that were pulled were much lower numbers than that, we know how many tens of thousands were there. Some estimates in the hundreds of thousands.
Let me glom on to a name you just mentioned, the assistant director, the guy who's the head of the Washington field office, D'Antuono, or I think that's the right way to pronounce it, D'Antuono.
I think so.
He is a very interesting character, in my opinion. And the reason why I think he's so interesting is that he came from Detroit and was nominally in charge of hatching the Gretchen Whitmer Fednapping case.
Right.
Give me some context on this character.
Well, that is where obviously we first became aware of him, was as the guy kind of in charge of that situation up there, and one of those. There's no other way to analyze the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping scenario than to call it for what it was. You know, this was one of those entrapment schemes that the FBI is so famous for. And if we listen to particularly this latest spate of whistleblowers that came out in the last few years, that's one of the themes that they have echoed over and over and over again, is that what FBI is best at is entrapping people that were otherwise not capable financially or with the resources or the time or even the inclination to perform some of these dastardly deeds, whether that's drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, bank robberies, or even the kidnapping of a sitting governor in the United States of America. But these are guys that go out there and post crazy stuff online, and then they get on the radar screen of these agents and of these special agents in charge of their field offices, and they go, hey, let's go see where we can take these guys. And so then suddenly they show up in their lives. And in this particular militia, militia is overstating who they were, but nevertheless, showing up in their lives and then insinuating themselves into their lives and into their discussions and saying, hey, maybe we got an idea for you, because it was the FBI who actually hatched the whole idea of kidnapping the governor. This wasn't even on the militia members' radar screen. Right.
I mean, as you point out, even using the term militia member is a very generous interpretation. The supposed ringleader, the grand mastermind of this plot, was living in the basement of a vacuum repair shop that it didn't have running water where he was living in this basement. I mean, this is the most pathetic story. You've got 14 FBI agents or their confidential human sources recruiting about a dozen guys, all of whom adamantly said, no way, we don't want to do anything violent. And the FBI, recruited them, armed them, trained them, gave them intelligence, had them do practice runs. They set up the entire thing. And a lot of these guys, I don't mean to besmirch them or make fun of them, but they were kind of low-hanging fruit. These were not, Rhodes Scholars. These guys were kind of down on their luck, and the FBI saw them as opportune targets to hatch their plot. And I don't think I'm exaggerating at all.
No, you're not exaggerating at all, but that's an MO of the FBI, is to identify these types of disaffected human beings and then engage them in some plot of their own, or just to ratchet up their numbers. Because look, let's be perfectly honest. If the FBI gets higher arrest rates, if they are able to convert more of their cases into terrorism classified cases, then not only are the special agents in charge getting 5-figure bonuses to their salaries every year, but they're also overall, as a cult blob system, which the FBI is, they're able to justify their very existence and then apply to Congress for more money the next year.
That is exactly correct. And those sustained superior performance awards, that's the 5-digit bonus bump they get. It's very important to pump up your stats in order to achieve those performance awards. It's critical for them. The really strange thing about this Gretchen Whitmer Fednapping case is that really it's a do-over. It's a recycled case that goes all the way back to 2009 with Eric Holder and Barack Obama, where they ginned up a virtually identical operation against a group that called themselves the Hutteries. That's Hutaree. If you Google up Huttery, you'll see that there is a remarkable sort of cut and paste of the 2009 case when it comes to this phony Fednapping case against Gretchen Whitmer. It was pure political theater. It was a setup job to demonize Trump supporters, essentially, and make them look like they were lunatic fringe, violent kidnappers. And the cases have in large part fallen apart. The reason I bring up all this sort of ancient history, recovering this lost history, is because the guy in charge in Detroit ends up becoming the guy in charge at the Washington Metropolitan Field Office of the FBI, months before the January 6th event. So should we be surprised that the same kind of operation was being run in Washington by the same guy?
Well, we shouldn't be surprised. And this is where all of the curious, we'll just call them the threads that we've been pulling for 4.5 years. I mean, we can start with his testimony under oath to the original January 6th Select Committee, in which he revealed that they did not do what would be standard operating procedure and deploy their counter surveillance teams, their special operation groups, they call them, that do that kind of work, as plainclothes officers in the crowd, monitoring, keeping us safe, doing actually what is the primary function of a healthy and moral government, which is to protect its citizens from force and fraud. And they weren't performing that function that day, despite the size of the crowd, despite the fact that the president was speaking, despite the fact that there were 6 permitted additional events at the Capitol, on the Capitol grounds that day after the rally at the Ellipse. I don't even know if America even knows this. There were 82 legally permitted events that week on the 5th and the 6th of January 2021. 82 legally permitted events by the various departments. That would be the Park Police, Department of the Interior, all the way up to the Capitol Police. And so the fact that they did not have those teams, and the fact that that day was not declared a NSSE, I forget what the other S is, but basically a national security event.
Right.
And for instance, the Charlie Kirk Memorial, in Arizona, that was declared an NSSE, and it was a national security event, which meant that FBI agents and other federal departments were going to be out there in force monitoring the situation to keep everybody safe.
Right.
But this event on January 6th was not declared such, and so they were in a stand down or low posture from the FBI and some of the other bureaus and agencies. That said, that does not mean that they were not there, because we know that they were.
Right.
We know that U.S. Marshals were there. We know that HSI was there. We also know that elements of the Department of Defense were there. We know by your own work at Judicial Watch, we know that the CIA had their own bomb sniffing dogs there from the FOIA dump that you guys got a year or so ago.
Exactly right.
So there's a lot of these threads to pull, and then let's just skip over a lot and get to this 274 agents that we learn were ordered to respond. I'm using that word very specifically, respond to the riot that had already been in action for a couple of hours, had already been declared by both the Capitol Police and Metro Police at the Capitol before these orders and emails were going out for these 274 employees of the FBI to respond to that event. Now, this is where it gets confusing and where it gets very convoluted and where the conspiracy people don't like it. This specific 274 agents were not part of what anybody would conspiratorially declare as the Fedsurrection. These were the ones that were responding to the violence that was already taking place. Now, where I think that both Kash Patel and where even the president messed up is they got their messaging very, very conflicted and at odds. The president himself, he went to Truth Social and said, "Oh, this proves what we've been saying all along, that this was, in fact, an event instigated by the feds." And he went into he went into typical Trumpian language in that. Whereas Kash said, "No, they were responding to a riot that was already taking place." And so now we have the confusion, and that's where this whole thing blew up over the weekend. And I was in the middle of it because I was the one that first broke the story about the 274 being deployed. And then after that, I mean, all hell broke loose on social media because millions of people that for years have bought into the Fedsurrection and even into the idea that Steve D'Antuono was the one behind it all felt vindicated then. But this isn't the group. This isn't the same group. This is the group that responded, and they responded reluctantly. And many of them in this after action report were very angry that the FBI would send them into a situation like that because they don't do crowd control. The FBI has no they don't even do training for crowd control. Crowd control is not even in their manual or their handbook. They don't learn it at the academy. They don't have annual classes on crowd control. And instead, in the after action report, they were complaining that they had been sent into a situation where they did not only have the training, but not the equipment to protect themselves. So this is a very confusing situation that Kash unleashed himself.
So there's a few things here that I think if we can, let's pause and take a look at it. How do we know that these 274 were responding?
It's because
not tasked on the front end.
Yeah, the orders came in. I actually have screenshots of text messages between the agents that received the orders after 3 o'clock. The violence at the Capitol began at 12:52.
Right. So,
and then
they're getting
the full battle was engaged, 30 minutes later.
Right. So these agents who are getting noticed to report immediately, what are they being told to do? To go to the Washington field office or to go to the Capitol, or what are their instructions? What are they?
Again, this was a very chaotic day, and it's very difficult. I mean, it's one of the worst written after action reports I've ever seen. It's a very difficult read, and it's not conclusive. There's a lot of confusion about which departments were deployed, who they were deployed with, which groups they were deploying with. But what ended up happening was some of them were told just to self-deploy. Some of them were told to meet up with groups and get instructions from supervisors in those particular departments or those particular groups. Some were given actual places to meet. Some were not given anything at all except just go to the Capitol. So, no, it's that bad. It's that bad. It's that chaotic.
I've been doing what I do for 42 years in one form or another, the last 26 or so here at Judicial Watch. So I am a firm believer that the government does all kinds of stupid stuff all the time, but this is probably way up there at the top of the list for stupid things poorly done. Because you would imagine if you had an emergency recall of people to deploy to an emergency, that first of all, you wouldn't have to guess at it. I mean, long ago and far away, sitting in Germany as a young lieutenant, when I got a phone call at 2:30 in the morning and someone said on the phone to me, "Lariat advance," I knew exactly what that meant. No one had to explain the 3rd Armored Division is going to roll out to the border. I mean, you knew what your requirements were and what your recall procedure was, and there was no guessing. So the idea that they're going to call in 270 some odd agents and we're just going to wing it. We don't really have a plan. We don't really know what we're doing or where we're going. And I mean, I don't doubt it because I know how stupid the government can be. But it is, to me, astounding that if there's a national emergency, there's no recall plan for FBI agents in the Washington area.
Well, the interesting thing is that there was some history from WFO itself for doing crowd control events, and that goes back to the summer of Love 2020.
Right.
And this is
probably the original Summer of Love in 1969 with Operation Garden Plot. So that's, yeah, but I get you. Okay, we'll keep in this century.
Famously, this was where we learned and where some of these FBI whistleblowers coined the phrase "Kneel Team 6."
Right.
Is because famously we got a half dozen or more of these FBI agents in their ballistic vests who were called out to go do crowd control, but rather than engaging in crowd control, they knelt before the BLM protesters and marchers.
Right, right. So you can see why even the very best intentioned people, when they hear this sort of explanation, they're deeply, deeply skeptical. I mean, that's part of the problem, is that you've got an American public that has its belief and trust in the FBI and the government. It's so corrosive what's occurred that even when they truthfully report on their stupidity, people are not willing to believe it. Even when they confess that they were idiots, people they don't buy it. They think there's something else going on.
Well, Chris, that's why we always, and you know this, as you said, from your 40 years of experience, you always default to government incompetence before you go to the conspiratorial or the nefarious. You have to do that. And in this situation, it's a lot of both, I believe, because first of all, we know. And I'll tell you why I know that the FBI is lying to us about their posture and their stance on January 6th to begin with. Because we also know from congressional testimony and other sources that they were notifying already at least 3 days in advance, and some communications weeks in advance, to the Capitol Police and other departments that there was a hellstorm coming that day. They knew it. We have it in writing. We have it in their testimonies. We have it from reports, multiple reports of this.
Can you drill down on that and give us an example or two? Because that's powerful stuff. What you just said. Can you give me an example of two or of this sort of foreknowledge or this be prepared to kind of mission they were thinking about?
Absolutely. Julie Farnham, who was the head of Capitol Police Intelligence at that time, she was brand new. She had just come on board with them in October of 2020. In her January 6th Select Committee interview, again under oath, and transcribed. She details very clearly where they were receiving advanced intel from about the possibilities or the likelihood of some real bad characters coming and doing some bad things that day on January 6th. Those included FBI, included DOD intelligence. It included intelligence from the New York City Police Department, which has one of the largest intelligence groups in the world.
Right.
And they knew that there was something going to happen that day, and so all of this came to them in a meeting, and it was she presented that intelligence in a meeting to Capitol Police leadership on January the 3rd, and which, by the way, which she also admits in that transcripted interview that Chief Son was not even invited to.
Which
So
speaks
this was
volumes all by itself.
That's right. And so this information was there. It was on the table. They knew about it. And then I love this example. Exactly 1 year later, after the event, during the week of the first year anniversary of January 6th, and Pelosi was doing all of her special events that week to commemorate, the January 6th event. And Newsweek released a story. And the headline of this story was that secret commandos with shoot to kill orders were at January 6th. That's the headline of the story. I dove into that, obviously, when I saw it and began to peel the layers back. But one of the things that was revealed in that is that the FBI themselves leaked this information to the writer, William Arkin. And the reason why they did that was because they knew the leaks about their positioning and their posture and all the other things were sure to come. So they were getting ahead of this. And one of the things that they revealed in their discussion with Arkin was that every single tactical unit not every single tactical unit, let me rephrase that. Every single federal three-letter agency that has a tactical team had deployed and were ready and already in position at the Capitol days before the event happened. So they were already pre-deployed. They were in theater. They were in the district. They were just waiting. Now, why would the FBI assemble, and as they say, depending upon how you want to pronounce this, all of these tactical teams were seconded or seconded to them under FBI orders at the time, including, the article reveals, a very special, highly secretive Special Forces operation group was also there at the Capitol that day. Now, I'm going to give you a little quick backstory. I was at the Capitol that day. I was covering the event. When I left the Capitol, and I did go inside the building, and when I was leaving on the 7th and going back to North Carolina, where my home is, I was driving home with another writer who accompanied me, and we were discussing what was going on, and I started getting phone calls. From Fox News and other agencies wanting to license my videos for the day. And so I'm dealing with that. And then we're start hearing all of the radio shows about the dragnet was already thrown. The very next day, they were already arresting people all over the country. And then I thought, by the time we got back to Raleigh, you know what? I'm not going home. I'm going to go to a friend's house because I'm going to go through all of my video frame by frame, do my own analysis, write my story, get it out there. And then if the FBI comes for me, at least I got my story out, right? That was my plan.
Right.
So I went and stayed with a Special Forces operative down in the Fort Bragg area. I won't even mention what unit he's with, but it's one of the Tier 1 units. And he said, "Oh, yeah, come stay with me. You'll be fine." And so as we were going through, and he's looking over my shoulders, I'm going through all of my hours of video, frame by frame by frame of what's going on. He's pointing out to me the special operative and the special agents provocateur. And he's saying, "Okay, now watch this guy right here. This is his job. Watch him complete it. And now he'll leave." Boom, and the guy leaves. He said, "Now watch her. Watch what she's doing." And he starts pointing them out to me. And I'm looking over my shoulder, and he goes, "Oh," and at one point he walks up to me. He's got a cup of coffee and a sandwich in one hand. I'll never forget it. And he walks over to me. He goes, "Oh yeah, by the way, I just learned that we had boots on the ground that day." And I went, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, we had operatives on the ground that day."
Right.
And I said, "Who else?" He goes, "Well, they were all there." He said we pretty much had everybody from every agency there in one form or the other, and he rattled them off. But when he said we had, my radar pinged in the red, and I began a 4.5 year long search into exactly what he was talking about and what he meant by that. And I will tell you that when that article a year later came out in Newsweek and said we had special operatives with shoot to kill orders in the crowd that day, I already knew who they were.
Right. No one should be surprised by this. I mean, we often are, and official Washington will never admit it, and they'll lie and say no such thing ever happened. But folks need to drop their naivete and understand and realize that there is especially with regard to the world of the Tier 1 units you made reference to, or special operations units, there's an entire sort of separate universe of clandestine activity that occurs that the government's not going to discuss, it's not going to admit to, it's not going to acknowledge, it's not going to, and that entity or that capability or those units exist for a reason, and often it's for a very good reason, but it gets, when you try to put overt routine police activity in operation and you try to line that up with units that operate covertly or clandestinely, they're two very different animals. And I mean, you were privileged to have a guy who knows what to look for, be able to pick people out and explain it to you. 99% of America will never have that. And so you had an advantage in your, essentially, a guy who does it for a living, sort of tutoring or pointing out stuff to you that no one's going to see or understand. But that's part of the problem of January 6th. I have no doubt that there were people like that there. I think it was almost a freak or an accident that we uncovered CIA dog handling teams there. Nonetheless, that kind of points to what we're talking about. I want to go to Christopher Wray just for a second, because he's under oath denying all this, right?
Of course. I mean, Christopher Wray famously used his special get out of jail free card more than anybody else. And we know what that is. It's that phrase we all know and hate. I'm sorry, I can't comment on an active investigation right now.
Right. And which, they would like to use it today, currently, with respect to, JFK and the grassy knoll. I mean, everything's under investigation. Nothing can be discussed. Everything's subject to review. And they hide behind that very disingenuously. So based on the material that you were able to uncover, what is your assessment? What's a disturbingly frank explanation for what was going on pre-1250 versus what was going on at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and onwards?
Well, it would take us a couple of hours for me to give you the full analysis, but if I'm giving you the quick elevator pitch right now,
sure.
Let's just start with this problem. The first problem that happened that day was that Trump took the stage an hour late. He was scheduled to speak at 11 o'clock. He was supposed to speak for 1 hour. Well, Trump is going to be Trump, and he's going to do what he wants to do. He didn't arrive at the stage till 11:57, and he left the stage at 1:16. All right, so with those timelines in mind, the provocateurs, that early group, whoever they were, the pros who were intent upon setting this thing off and lighting that fire up at the Capitol were waiting for their signal, waiting for their orders, waiting for all the people to be released from the ellipse and start coming over, except that they weren't coming. And the reason why they weren't coming in the numbers they expected at the time was because the president was still speaking on stage.
So but just for clarity, it's your opinion, and it's a considered educated opinion, and it's not just some off-the-cuff remark. So your sort of thoughtful, knowledgeable opinion on this is, you said that the operators, the professional operators who sought to kick this off, that's exactly what you mean, that these were people who they showed up that day to start an attack on the Capitol and breach the building.
Yeah, and Chris, I'm willing to say to you right now, I don't know who they were. I mean, look, variously people want to put this on Antifa. They want to put this on the FBI. They want to put this on operatives from Nancy Pelosi's group. Now, by the way, we did a story back in May about Nancy Pelosi's Fix-It guy, and his name is Aaron Black. Now, Aaron Black is a guy that on social media postures himself as the senior political advisor to Team Pelosi. And Aaron Black's history goes all the way back to being one of the primary organizers of Occupy Wall Street. He is a professional instigator. He is a professional paid riot starter. This is what he does. In 2016, Project Veritas caught him in a sting operation where he admitted that it was his paid operatives that started the violence at the Trump Chicago rally in the summer of 2016 that caused that rally to be canceled. He
Right.
admitted that that was his group. Now, same guy, you fast forward, I have a source. This was very interesting. I have a European intelligence source tells me that I need to start looking into the name Aaron Black. And I said, well, why? He goes, just look it up and get back with me. So I get back with him. And then when I said, oh my God, I did the background on the guy. I found everything you could find about the guy. And I said, so what's his stance on January 6th? He said, our sources tell us that he had as many as 50 paid operatives, provocateurs, working for him on the ground in the crowd on January 6th. Now, that doesn't mean that they were hitting cops, but it could be those people that were waving people, directing people,
Sure.
bullhorns, the people that know the tactics of color revolution, that have been trained in Hong Kong, Germany, Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, and suddenly they all show up in DC that day. And these weren't Trump supporters. Look, I know everybody gets tired of hearing about Ray Epps. I mean, you either believe he's just a big doofus, or you believe that he was the primary mover shaker that day. But the bottom line about Ray Epps is that was in the key point of the first two barricade breaches. He was at the actual breach point in both cases. In my mind, the DOJ gave the game away when they slapped him on the wrist, gave him 6 months probation, a $500 fine, didn't even make him come to D.C. for his trial, and convicted him on one misdemeanor.
Right.
Pled guilty to one misdemeanor. Whereas other individuals who did far less got far serious consequences thrown on them, including yours truly. I was charged with 4 misdemeanors. I was put through the ringer for over 3 years as a result of that. And all I did was cover the event. I didn't wave a single soul into the Capitol. But the people that were there with and acting in those ways that trained provocateurs do were the people that were already there. Now, Ray Epps, in his testimony, this is my point, he testified that he's a Trump supporter and that he came out there with his son, who was going because he's a Trump supporter. If Ray Epps was a Trump supporter, why was he at the Capitol an hour before the president ever finished his speech?
Right. 100% correct.
You went across the country from Arizona to D.C.
So
specifically
he could miss
to
a
the
speech.
president?
Right. Yeah.
Next question I have for you, Chris. So the president is at the ellipse, but there are dozens of trained riot journalists with all of their tactical gear on. They've got their ballistic plates on. They've got their helmets. They've got gas masks. And of course, all of their expensive camera gear. And they're already pre-positioned at the Capitol. Why were they there before? The president's over there, but they're over here.
Right. Right. Yep. These are questions. I mean, one day, maybe one day we'll get real answers. So that's the front end. And then on the back end at 3 o'clock, we have 274 FBI agents either, making a beeline for some address or some office, or kind of staggering in from whatever they were doing that day. What's the explanation? What's the I mean, if you're going to bother to order all those guys and gals, I guess both.
Yeah.
So what? Now what?
Well, let's assume at 3 o'clock they did not know that the other arriving police departments from Maryland and Virginia and eventually the National Guard would be able to bring this crowd under control. And so the FBI and all of their infinite incompetency were just reacting to the situation and did the best they could and deployed a bunch of people that they could find, people that were already sitting in their offices. And by the way, most of those agencies and bureaus were on pretty limited stand down mode anyway as a result of COVID. For instance, the Capitol Police, as you know, 70% of their workforce, their uniformed workforce, was on administrative leave that day. Now, this was on a day that the leadership of the Capitol Police had signed off on 6 protest events themselves on the grounds.
Right.
It should have been an all boots on the ground day, and by policy, I'm talking about policy for the Capitol Police, that requires the uniformed officers to pull double shifts, which they did not do. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the midnight shift guys were leaving and the morning shift guys were coming in. They had no, contrary to Officer Harry Dunn's testimonies and what he wrote in his book, there were no morning roll call briefings. We learned about that in the trials, that the officers who did have the crap beat out of them in several locations actually testified in the trials that there were no roll call briefings. One officer in particular who was just completely covered in bear spray at the famous East Columbus doors before that was breached. He testified in the first Oath Keepers trial under cross-examination. He was asked by one of the defense attorneys, he said, were you aware that there was anything going on at the Capitol that day? He said, no. Were you aware that there were permitted events signed off by Capitol Police leadership that day? No, I was not aware. He said, and I quote, he said, the only thing that we were aware of is that there was something happening at the White House.
This is a refresher, a reminder that everyone needs to kind of go back and periodically, touch mentally, just to refresh and restore your recollection of what was going on and what you think you know about January 6th versus what actually happened. And then I think even more disturbingly, how our Department of Justice pursued the prosecution of each of these cases. I mean, you had your experience, but what's your overall take on the prosecutions themselves?
Well, let me finish up that thought, because I was going to tie in the Capitol Police under deployment that day, because on the date they had something on the order of 1,800 to 2,000 uniformed officers in their employ, but they only had 200 at the Capitol that day. All right, that's shocking, especially on a day where they should have been all boots on the ground. Right,
full up, yep.
And then we look and we juxtapose that to what the FBI's posture was that day, and D'Antuono saying in his testimony that they didn't even deploy their counter surveillance teams that day. I'll ask you the question, Chris. Doesn't that sound like a setup for something? To be underdeployed on purpose, knowing that already having warned the Capitol Police, the same FBI, that something was coming, and then to be deliberately undermanned and underdeployed?
Yeah, I mean, you're holding two totally opposite, sort of mindsets simultaneously. So one is, oh my goodness, protests, big event, controversial, presidential election, a lot of ill will, bad feeling, accusations of misconduct and gamesmanship and a wrongfully counted election, et cetera, et cetera. And then, okay, go ahead and cut loose 60% of the workforce. Don't worry about it. And, we're going to have prepped special weapons and tactics or special sort of reaction forces on standby at the same time we let everybody go. Right. It's incoherent. It's insane. Again, you talk about advance notice days, if not a week beforehand, with intelligence estimates saying that hey, this could break very bad. We still don't. It's wildly frustrating to many, many, many people, especially a lot of Judicial Watch reporters and Blaze viewers as well, to be able to resolve this, to be able to give a coherent, rational explanation, even accounting for stupid mistakes. I mean, you can talk about stupid mistakes in the conduct of the overall event, but they're sort of footnotes, right? They're not the main narrative. Like, the Normandy invasion. Guess what? Mistakes were made, but we don't talk about the mistakes too much, or we do anecdotally, but overall we understand what the Normandy invasion was about, right? So this is the same huge historical event, and it's absolutely incoherent. It makes no sense no matter how many times I hear it explained. And we haven't even gone off down some bunny trails with things like the pipe bombs at the RNC and DNC, right? Each of those is a half an hour, 1 hour long discussion, frankly. Have you ever gotten a decent explanation for the pipe bomb story?
And the FBI just through the new committee to John Solomon just released another report about the pipe bombs today, which was not only in and of itself not substantive. There was nothing new to be learned about it. Everything we know about the pipe bomb, and by the way, I've spent God knows how many hundreds of hours in the Capitol CCTV viewing room myself, analyzing those very issues itself, and we broke a couple of stories. It was me and my team that broke the story about the cameras, the Capitol Police cameras that were turned away from the investigative scene of the pipe bomb. We were the ones that found the camera that showed the DNC bomb being I want to say detonated, because it didn't detonate. It was a dud. It was a dud. These were
right.
Non-viable.
It was neutralized. Devices. Yeah.
Right. And the report that came out today once again tried to emphasize that they were viable to some extent, but we've known for 4 years that they weren't. We know from FBI investigators that were on the pipe bomb immediately after January 6th that these were not real devices. And so even what was released today was, I think, another effort by, I hate to say this, but we have all been rooting for Kash Patel. We've all been rooting for Dan Bongino. We've been rooting for reform in that particular government agency. And they've made so many missteps here in their first 7, 8 months in office that they're desperate for PR wins right now. And I think that that's what that release last week was about on Thursday afternoon,
right,
about the 274 agents. It was Kash Patel's being desperate for a win in the Charlie Kirk assassination when he came out and said, "We have the subject in custody." He tweets it out, and then an hour and a half later he has to go, "Oops, sorry, no, we don't." Right. And that those kind of mistakes were made because he's not a cop. A cop wouldn't make that mistake.
That's exactly, you segued. You beat me to my segue. I wanted to ask you, we talk about the particulars of January 6th, but I wanted to kind of back up, get up to 100,000 foot level, look down, and say, what is your assessment of this new, and I put that in air quotes, this new FBI? I think people had hopes. I think people relied upon the statements and sort of the philosophical viewpoint of Kash Patel, and line that up with where we are today.
Well, I don't know if I stole this from Tom Fitton or if he's just reading from the same handbook that I am, but the new FBI is the same as the old FBI, and I'm disappointed and sad to say so, but that's not going. The FBI is not going to change because you put Kash Patel, who wrote a book called Government Gangsters and who promised to turn the Hoover building into a museum to the deep state. And it's not going to change because you send a podcaster who's a former Secret Service agent up there as the guy to run the company, because the deputy director is the COO,
right?
And so he went from managing a dozen people at his podcast to managing 37,000 people,
Right.
roughly. That's a big jump for anyone. I wouldn't take the job. I wouldn't consider the job. I certainly wouldn't pretend that I would even know what to do, especially as complicated and disparate as all the units and the tasks and the duties and the different departments of the FBI. The FBI is just not just a bunch of field agents. It's scientists, it's analysts, it's administrative, secretarial, accounting. I mean,
Sure.
they have forensic accountants, for heaven's sakes. This, the most what I would consider the most despised job in the world, if for me to even consider taking. And so to think that he can jump from what he was doing to that is an incredibly huge expectation on the American people, or even on whoever nominated him or suggested that he hold that position. But in Kash Patel's position, um, it is. It seems to have been one misstep after the other. You go back to May when he was on the Maria Bartiromo show,
Right.
and Cash and Dan both were promising big things. Just give us 2 more weeks. Just wait, 2 more weeks.
Right.
The big stuff is coming. Well, then it didn't come in 2 weeks, and so suddenly there's this feeling of desperation to get something out to appease those expectations from the American people, and I think that mistakes are being made by that. But now to answer your question, I don't think that the FBI is going to be changed unless it's completely busted up into its disparate pieces and agencies and departments and sent out and redeployed with all the other departments out there. The United States needs a Federal Bureau of Investigation. All right. The federal government can afford and can pay for what the states cannot and what local law enforcement cannot, and can provide the backup and the service and the support to local and state policing organizations. We do not need a federal police force with a SWAT team swatting misdemeanor defendants, people that for 10 minutes walked through the Capitol building, took a couple of selfies, went home, and then had SWAT teams show up and put the red dots on their forehead at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's not who the FBI is supposed to be. It's not what they should be, and they need to be busted up. The reason why they cannot be changed, and this is particular to the intelligence community itself, is that they are a big blob. I think it was Mike Benz who coined that. He started calling these groups the blob,
Right.
and it's ever growing, ever expanding, ever consuming more of the taxpayers' resources as it grows and it grows and it destroys and becomes more powerful. And so rather than allowing that to happen, Kash Patel should be doing what he promised to do, what he claimed should be done in his book, and he should be dismantling the agency, and as I said, into its separate parts and sending each one to where it can be best, where the talent can be best used. Whether that's counter surveillance, whether it's counterintelligence, wherever. But we don't need well, this is a bugaboo of mine. I'm sorry if I get passionate about it. But there's 80 something people that are alive in Waco, Texas today if the local sheriff had gotten his way.
Right, which is to
They had to do.
walk up and serve a warrant while he was getting ice cream at the DQ or whatever it was.
Exactly.
And then case closed. Move along.
That's all they had to do. And that's what the local sheriff wanted to do. And that's what needs to happen going forward is the FBI needs to, if when needed, when called upon, do the work of the investigation, the forensic science, what they can afford and what they have the skills to do. And then when it's time to issue a warrant to make an arrest, they present the evidence to local law enforcement, sit down with them. What's the best way to do this in your community?
Well, you know what changed all that? And there was one event in American history that catapulted the FBI into the position, or at least into the lane that it's in now. And that was the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. And that's when kidnapping became a federal crime. Charles Lindbergh's son was kidnapped. The New Jersey State Police responded. In fact, General Norman Schwarzkopf's father was the chief of the New Jersey State Police at that time, believe it or not, talking about strange coincidences. And it was such a sensation, it was such a big deal, it was such a big unsolved mystery that J. Edgar Hoover couldn't bear missing out on all the publicity. And so the FBI inserted itself and attempted to take jurisdiction over that case. But that was the big event. That was the turning point for the FBI, from being a bunch of accountants who did forensic work to suddenly becoming the big crime busters. The Lindbergh kidnapping was probably the pivotal event that changed the landscape of American law enforcement. And now it's a political police. Now it's what the Germans would call the Staatsschutz, right? State security. And it's a very sad turn of events, and we're feeling it. And like you pointed out, even with guys who you would hope would do the right thing and would make good decisions and change the nature of the beast, I think that both Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, I hate to say this, but it's my belief, I want to be proven wrong. I think they've been captured.
By the beast.
Yeah.
By the beast itself
they've been captured and co-opted, I believe. I still think their heart's in the right place, but it's just that the blob is so big and so heavy that they can't punch their way through.
Well, and they have the other problem of dealing with Washington in general, and is that there's far too many people, particularly if we're talking about in the intelligence community. I mean, hell, if we're talking about the Capitol Police, they know far too much about far too many people. They know how many, the Praetorian Guard, the Capitol Police, the Dignitary Protection Detail of the Capitol Police. What do they know? They know everything about their detailees. They know who they sleep with. They know what kind of misbehaviors are going on their foreign junkets. And that's why they're able. The Capitol Police is far more powerful than they should be. On the one hand, they look like the Keystone Cops. They look like glorified mall cops. In fact, I'm not, and I don't mean to offend the frontline Capitol Police officers, but this is the perception in the country: is that you could spend 30 years as a uniformed Capitol Police officer and never be anything more than a glorified tour guide. Yes, ma'am. The restroom's that way. That's what they end up doing for much of their career. And on the other hand, the Dignitary Protection Detail sees it all.
Yep.
And they know where the bodies are buried. And that's why they are so powerful. That's why, and you guys there know that's why the Capitol Police are not subject to FOIA.
That is correct. They are not.
They are exempt.
They are not.
Why? Because Congress wants to be exempt.
Well, Steve, I'm going to give you the very last word. Let people know how to follow you and how to follow your work at The Blaze. And if you have something to tease, you got some story you're going to break in the next day or two.
Yeah.
Maybe give us a hint about that. And we're going to link your reporting in the show notes to this episode. So when we push this out as a podcast, folks can go down, they can scroll through and see links to your work and to your social media and all that. Having said that, you get the last word. What do you have to say?
So obviously on The Blaze, theblaze.com is where my archives of articles are. They even have a special section. They gave me my own URL. It's theblaze.com/truth. I mean, that's
a good handle. That's a good handle to have, truth.
Right, and that largely is comprised of our January 6th work, because we have a series on YouTube, on the Blaze TV channel on YouTube. If you go to the playlist called "The Truth About January 6th," is where all of our video compilations are, on the pipe bomb, on the trials, on the trial perjuries of Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn and Special Agent David Lazarus, who perjured themselves in the Oath Keepers trial, and so many other things related to that. So those are the best places. And then, of course, on X is where I do most of my rabble rousing on a daily basis, and that's Steve Baker USA, at Steve Baker USA. So those are the best places to follow me. As far as a tease of something we're working on,
Yeah.
you remember I told you that the thing that really caught my attention and made me throw myself, actually changed my life, to be honest with you, was this time when a tier one operator leaned over my shoulder and said, "Oh, yeah, we were there that day. We had boots on the ground on the 6th."
Sure.
Well, I have never given up on finding out who that was, and we're getting very close to revealing that. As you know, all the I's have to be dotted, all the T's have to be crossed.
Sure.
Legal has to approve it, but we know a lot more about what was happening as it relates to the DOD. I have already said on a couple of programs this weekend and yesterday, in because I've been basically on a media tour for the last 3 days. And what I have said in a couple of these, and I'll say it to you as well, Chris, is that I don't know what FBI's involvement was in terms of kicking off or fanning the flames of the Fedsurrection that day, but I do know what the DOD's involvement was.
Well, that's great. That's very intriguing. And I know there's a lot of Americans who want to know exactly what that was. So we look forward to your reporting on that. That's fantastic. And I guarantee our folks will stay tuned and check back with you to see what that reporting is. It sounds very, very important. Steve Baker from The Blaze, thank you so much for joining us on Watch.
Chris, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm Chris Farrell on Watch.